often the gap between our intentions and our impact is wider than we as human beings can see. We're just bad observers of our own reality, and we need the eyes of others to help us really calibrate accurately.
Hello, my friends. Today is going to be a great day because we are speaking with author Ron Carucci. We're asking the question, is honesty really the best policy in leadership? He is the author of a new book called To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. And if you're saying to yourself, yeah, I'm a pretty honest person, I lead with honesty, then today you have to listen to this podcast. You have to listen to this episode because in this episode, Ron challenges us. What is honesty in leadership? When are you being honest? When are you standing in your truth? When is it hard to do so? And when does your not standing in your honest truth because you're protecting someone else's feelings or you're defending your own? When is that hurting and negatively impacting the people around you? When are you establishing honesty for safety and security and confidence in your team? I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. He is a fantastic man to listen to. He has some great insight, and he definitely challenged my perception of what honesty is in leadership. Join me in welcoming Ron Carucci. Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day. I am bringing to you today an expert in his field. He is an author, speaker, researcher, CEO of Navalent, which is a consulting firm to help organizations transform, not just for their profit, but for their benefit in terms of the culture and the experience and the purpose of their brand. And he's here today to tell us a little bit more about his brand new book called To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. My friends, join me in welcoming Ron Carucci. Welcome, Ron.
Tarryn, how are you? Nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here today because I am excited to be diving into this idea of why honesty is such an integral part of leadership and of incredible leadership. So tell us a little bit about your book and how honesty plays into that.
Well, gosh, we don't have to look around too far, Taryn, do we, to see that it's not easy to find a place to trust today. I mean, I think we're in a trust recession, and trustworthiness is a standard that's gone up because our experience of the lack of it has gone into a free fall. So our desire to trust in media, in leaders, in organizations, in our communities, has never been more intensified because our lack of it has been we're starved. So it's important to understand today that our reputations of trustworthiness, our sense of why people rely on us, a sense of why people would come to us for the help we want to offer, is no longer predicated on, well, you're not a liar, so you're trustworthy. The expectations of what it means to be labeled as trustworthy, to be honest, are far greater than we understand. And so without even realizing we're doing it, we're falling far short of what it takes to earn and keep the trust of others.
Wow, it's so fascinating to be looking at it in light of what we've been going through culturally over the past few years. That's
Yep.
really interesting. So it's your impression that really as a society, we're all at a need for this up-leveling of honesty and trusting.
We're starved for it, and there's plenty of research. The Edelman Trust Barometer, you look at all the great places to work data, suggests that, and of course now you have this mass resignation of people leaving the workplace, clearly declaring that they're no longer going to tolerate some of the abuses or the incompetence or the challenges of the workplace anymore. So we're getting signals from all sides that people are voting with their feet. And what that tells us is that we need to level up as leaders, as organizations, as communities. We need to level up on what it takes to create an environment where people want to be trusted, can be trusted, care to be trusted, and act in a trustworthy way.
So, to all those leaders and business owners out there who are listening to this and thinking to themselves, gosh, here I have thought I've been honest this whole time. What is the mistake that we're making?
Well, one is that we assume that we earn the trust of other people based on the currency we trade trust in. So if I extend trust based on competence, I assume that I'll earn your trust based on my competence, but you may be choosing to measure or extend or withhold trust based on my character or my personality or a particular sense of generosity or some particular value. If I don't know that's how I earn your trust, I'm going to miss you. I have one client that I was giving some feedback to, and good guy, smart man, very successful in the large part of the enterprise that he led. And I had to tell him that he'd lost the trust of his team. And of course, he got very defensive. He said, "Well, I'm honest with them. I'm transparent. I share information. I don't pull any punches. Well, how could they not trust me?" I said, "Well, apparently, in meetings when they have something to share and they're not quite all buttoned up in how they share it, you get very impatient and you cut them off. And sometimes you do that with sarcasm and in a way that sort of demeans them." And he said, "Well, everybody has a bad day." I said, "Well, apparently you have a lot of them." And what you're telling people with those behaviors is that you're not a safe place for them to be themselves. You're not safe for them to bring an unformed thought or incomplete ideas for conversation. And if they go on too long, they're no longer worthy of listening to. And so they can't trust you. And he would have never connected the dots on what he thought was probably a silly idiosyncratic behavior that probably was minorly annoying to damaging the trust of people whose regard and respect he desperately needed. So we don't connect the dots a lot of times on how it is we're creating environments. The definition of honesty in the book is truth, justice, and purpose. What that means is that, and what we learned in both the neuroscience research as well as the social sciences, is that you have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason. Truth, justice, and purpose. It's no longer enough to just do one of those. You have to do all three, and you have to do them well.
Wow, it's so fascinating to imagine that everyone has their own language of trust or honesty. And it's interesting as a leader to try and get the pulse of that on your team and on your community. How do you suggest leaders do that?
Well, I think there's some very simple ways to begin. So all of our, we learned in the research, we talked to 3,200 leaders over 15 years. So there was a lot of robustness in how we analyzed what data we collected. And we found 4 factors that predict under what conditions people will tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good, and under what conditions they will lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first. So these are all hiding in plain sight in our organizations. Here's a simple one. So all of our organizations make promises, right? Your listeners are all serving patients of some kind. So there's certainly some patient-centric promise they make about the environments they want to create. They hang on the walls. We call them missions and values and purpose statements. Well, it turns out those values, those promises are more sacrosanct than we thought. Now, many companies do it for cosmetic reasons, right? They just hang on the wall. They make a nice screensaver. They make nice, tchotchkes and T-shirts and mugs. But when you raise them to your audiences or to your organization, there's a little bit of an eye roll. Like, yeah, who knows what those are? Well, it turns out when you declare promises that you're not keeping, when your organization's words and actions don't match, you're actually 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and be selfish. Because what you've told people is, say, around here, we say one thing, but we do another. And when you've told people that's okay to do that with your most sacrosanct promises, you've told people it's okay to do that whenever they need to. And so bring those promises off the wall as a leader. Take in your whatever is prominent, your values, your purpose, your mission, put it on the table and ask your team, how well are we living these? People look at us as examples of these. When I, as your leader, engage you, do you see me setting an example of these, or do you see me contradicting them? If somebody followed our team around with a video camera all day long and videotape us as a day in the life of our team, could that videotape be used as a training program to teach these values? Simple exercise, but it's a way to calibrate whether or not you are earning and keeping the trust, whether you are acting in ways where your actions and words are consistent enough, your say-do gap is 0, in a way that actually makes you reliable, predictable, and therefore trustworthy.
Now, one of the things I know you touch on in your book is the idea of accountability. How does personal accountability fall into all of this?
Well, I think there's accountability is not just an individual act. It's a community. It's an active community, right? Because nothing we do is in isolation of somebody else. So the problem with today's accountability systems is that they were built for a time when we did repeatable work, where it was sort of production oriented. How many claims did you close? How many files did you process? How many T-shirts did you print? How many patients did you move through the clinic today? But the reality is, in today's remit, our remit is much more personal. Today, my greatest contribution to our community, to our patients, is my insight, my analysis, my care, my diagnosis, my perspective, my creativity. So when you evaluate my contribution, you're evaluating me. The contribution and the contributor are far more fused than they ever were. You no longer can say, it's not personal, I'm just evaluating your work. It's just, I'm just being objective here. Well, that's not how work works anymore. So if those accountability processes lack dignity and fairness, meaning I have as much of a chance of succeeding in this organization as anybody else does, no matter who I am or what I show up as or what I look like, or what role I'm in, right? So in a clinic, we all know there's a hierarchy between doctors and nurses. Or between main doctors, and now we have all these different stratospheres of physicians' assistants and lead nurses and all these hierarchies here. Does that hierarchy play out as status? And are some roles more privileged than others? If you work in a tech company, your engineers are privileged, right? If you work in a clinic, are your dentists and doctors privileged and others are not? And do those privileges disadvantage others in some way you wouldn't necessarily see because you're enjoying the privileges? So if that's the case, and if the way my contributions are talked about, are measured, does it include dignity to my work? Your accountability systems are completely corrupted. You're now 4 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first. But if there is dignity, if dignity and justice do surround how you treat contributions, now you're 4 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's really interesting because, one of the aspects that I think as leaders we look for is accountability in our team members for their responsibilities. And so one of the ways that we've been able to measure that over time are with those earlier examples that you gave, those metrics that we can use with the measurable statistics in terms of dollars and cents or hours or productivity. Those kinds of things can measure the value of a team member. So how do you measure these softer aspects, things that seem more subjective?
Well, I do think that, there are still observable behaviors that come behind those, right? So the frequency with which those behaviors are observed and experienced by your peers, right? Getting others involved in saying, how often is somebody going the extra mile, demonstrating care to patients? I mean, certainly you're collecting data from patients, so you can easily track back the impact of those you're serving to the behaviors you're asking people to demonstrate. So any observable behavior can be measured in how effective you are or how frequently you display it. And you should have everybody evaluate themselves so you can compare your own calibration to others, because a lot of times we think we assess ourselves based on our intentions. I intend to be these things, so I'm going to give myself far more credit. But often the gap between our intentions and our impact is wider than we as human beings can see. We're just bad observers of our own reality, and we need the eyes of others to help us really calibrate accurately. So I think creating accountability as a communal system where what a privilege to have that many eyes on your work, to have that many people helping you improve and get better.
So a big part of this is communication.
I call it relationship, right? You have to, the basis of accountability begins in a very intimate and trust-based relationship between a leader and a follower. If that relationship is foundational, they'll communicate just fine. If it's technique, if it's I'm clearly have read a book, or I'm using my 8 habits or my 7 steps or my 5 secrets on you, it's going to signal, this is rote. I don't care. I'm just going through the motions. And people know that. I mean, you don't often have people show up at work every day and say things like, oh, I'm so excited. Today's my performance appraisal.
No.
Which is, the process that should be the most honor-filled and
Mm.
dignifying process in our organization has become one of the most demeaning and demoralizing experiences and terrifying for people, which is sad, right? This is the place where the place you leave your fingerprint on the world is
Mhm.
being now enshrouded in a document or in a conversation of some kind. That should be thrilling. That should be honoring. It should be, I should walk out 2 feet in the air. And leaders have a responsibility to make sure that's the experience. And we're filling out forms, checking boxes, signing them, and sending them off to HR. And it's no wonder our disengagement scores are what they are. It's no wonder 50% of the workplace says they feel no sense of meaning and purpose in their work. And the danger is your best talent will quit and leave. Your mediocre talent will quit and stay.
I like that. Yeah, you're right. You're right. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. When do you find it's most difficult for leaders to show up with honesty?
When they're stressed and when they're tired, and when they have perceived a performance pressure, which it may not be an accurate perception, but when they have determined a certain level of urgency about a performance target or a deadline or a commitment that they feel is at risk, they become their worst selves, which is the time you actually need to be your best self, right? But that's the place I see when there's some personal threat. Or there's some personal lack of self-care. They're tired, they're fatigued, and then they lose their patience. They become self-involved. They become less caring and less respectful, and people become means to ends and cogs. And everybody sees it, and that they then feel this is a very utilitarian relationship. Your impact as a leader can be measured by you at your worst moment. I do believe the cliche that we're not defined by our best or worst moments. That's true. But if you have a lot of bad moments, and you're in a high stress job like healthcare, and you're constantly treating the people around you in demeaning, subservient, disrespectful ways, you're just asking for a liability, right? You're just inserting risk of ethical risk, moral failure risk, moral injury risk, and defection risk into your organization. So if you're not clued in to the connection between your actions and the reduction or increasement of risk in your organization, that's important, right? Here's a very simple litmus test. If you don't have somebody coming into your office at least once or twice a week telling you something that makes you uncomfortable, you can be very confident your leadership sucks.
Wow. Explain. Tell me more about that.
Well, and if you assume that the reason they're not coming in to tell you something that makes you uncomfortable is because there isn't anything to say, now you're dumb. Because if you in any complex organization, that could be 6 people, but in a clinic, in any in healthcare, the variables and the uncontrollable factors that go into running those organizations are massive. There are always things that are going to be going awry. Now, I'm not talking about people coming in and recreationally complaining. I'm not talking about whining. I'm talking about legitimate concerns that need your attention, for which they may have ideas to be empowered to go fix. But if you're not a safe place for them to bring those, rest assured they're telling somebody. You are the topic of conversation at dinner in their homes every night. If you don't know what stories they're telling about you, you should wonder. And so if they're not coming into your office to share those disconcerting or sensitive or difficult things, which could be about you, you have to ask yourself, where are they going? Data that I could use to improve our organization, rich, important insights that, sure, it might be difficult to hear, are getting away from me. Why have I not created the environment that's safe enough for them to freely tell me?
Hmm. Rana, I'm fascinated. How did you start this journey yourself? What sparked your interest in researching and in empowering businesses in this way? Where does this come from for you personally in your interest in this
Well,
important aspect of leadership?
I've been at it for a long time, and in the opening story of the book, I talk about the fact that, we collect data all the time. I'm always in organizations holding up mirrors. That's how we
Mhm.
begin our work with our clients. And our client journeys span, 8, 10, 12 years because of the incredible partnership we build and the, the privilege we have to have incredible impact on the lives of lots of people because our transformational work really transforms. And I get to have front row seats to the most spectacular moments, from the perils of on the brink to rising phoenixes,
Mm,
and it's an incredible thrill. But I'm always sitting before leaders who are telling me stories, telling me insights, sharing points of view that they're not telling their colleagues. And it was in one moment. I've done this for 30 years, but I was interviewing a head of strategy for a $40 billion food company. They had been through a catastrophically failed merger or acquisition. They'd acquired, I think it was a $3 or $4 billion food company. And he opened the conversation with me by saying, Ron, if I'm honest, there's that line. We knew it was going to fail. We knew from the beginning we didn't have the capabilities to integrate them. Our portfolios didn't match. Our cultures were too different. We would ruin them. And we loved the idea of having them in our portfolio of brands. But the reality is, we know that the way we bring food to the world is becoming irrelevant. We know that our brands are tired. Some of them need to be retired. We've not kept up. We've lost our way, and so we're just making things up as we go. And Tarryn, it just hit me like a rock. Like, where was that courage and honesty in the room when you needed it? Like, why is it? I hear your remorse. And by the way, this is a team of good-hearted, this was not a bunch of corrupt idiots. These were smart people. And yet, if you all had that sense at a moment of desperation, why couldn't somebody say, let's be honest about why we're doing this? Or can we step back and reflect here what straw we're grasping at?
mm,
What wishful thinking we might have behind this?
mm,
Can we acknowledge our own deal fever and recognize that we're not being honest about the risks here? Why couldn't that have happened? And what would have happened
mm,
had they done that?
mm,
But I look at it in my own life. We're all dishonest. We all have moments where our character is less than what we want it to be. Moments where I have embellished an accomplishment to a boss. One story I tell in the book was early in my career. We lived in a neighborhood where people made way more money than we did. And I was at a birthday party with one of my young kids, and all the dads were in one room and all the moms were in another room. And, all the dads are talking about their lavish vacation plans for the summer and how they're trying to find nannies to go with them, and, complaining that they couldn't get upgrades to first class business fare to Paris, to whatever. And of course, I'm feeling smaller and smaller and smaller. And so when they turn to me, and say, "Where are you going this summer, Ron?" Suddenly I was going to Europe. And then I was already calculating in my mind how I was going to have to lie to cancel a trip because of a work emergency.
mm.
And I'm like, why did I feel so small in the presence of other people? But we all do it, right? The University of Massachusetts research suggests that we all lie on average twice a day. The question I always have for leaders is not if you lie, but why. If I ask you to sort of go back over the last 10 days and just examine the moments where you were less than your values. You were abrupt and curt to a Starbucks barista. You missed the chance to say thank you to your wife or husband. You embellished data to a boss. You withheld information from a business review that you thought might put you in a bad light, and you sort of spun it. Pick it.
Mm.
If I were to ask you to examine 10 of those moments, you would see a pattern. You would see a definite, consistent look at the things that bring you to your dishonesty, because they're not random. We all make choices for reasons, and the choices we make to choose behaviors we think make us feel safer, make us look a certain way, make us feel more significant, are a narrative we've chosen to say this behavior meets this need, even though it doesn't. And so if you want to become more honest in your life and therefore more trustworthy, you have to confront the places that bring you to your dishonesty in your life, uh, or you will keep repeating those narratives.
Wow. That's awesome. That's a great tool. That's a great technique. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of confidence.
And courage.
Yeah.
And if you're not certain what those moments are, ask somebody who has a front row seat to your life, because they do.
Yes. And that takes a lot of courage too, to ask for that feedback and to have that mirror.
And then to give it.
Mhm. You talk about in your book about those 4 factors of honesty: the clear identity, accountability, governance, and cross-functional relationships. And I think you've touched on all of those to some extent here. But tell me a little bit about the governance part, the governance aspect.
Yeah, decision making.
Mhm.
We all walk into rooms in our organizations. Often they're referred to as meetings. And we all know the difference between walking into a room where I know that the information being presented is balanced. It's got equally weighted merits on pros and cons of how the data is presented. We know that there's a decision yet to be made that we all need to contribute to. And I'm not at all ill at ease that if I want to offer a dissenting view or a challenge to the prevailing thinking in the room, I'm safe to do that. Versus walking into a room that we know is orchestrated theater, where the decision on the table is already been made, but this is to make it look like I'm being involved and included. The data is being tilted in some way. The presenter has an agenda. And the last thing I think you want to hear is a point of view that contradicts the prevailing views in the room that you're trying to create and engineer. In which case, the only way I can get the truth in that organization is to go underground, right? So we all have seen it. We know the difference. If your decision-making systems and your information sharing systems are corrupted, and I can't get access to the truth, and my voice is not welcome other than to agree, you're now 3.5 times more likely to have people lie and cheat. But if that room is a safe place for dangerous truths, for open debates, for dueling fact bases to come together and find a source of truth, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people tell the truth and behave fairly. So these things matter. They're hiding in plain sight. We just take boring, silly meetings for granted. Meetings today are, for the most part, a place where I can dissociate and do my email.
Yeah. I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am. You've already given us so many amazing nuggets. I am so excited for my audience to be reading your book. Who would you say would most value the information that you have in your book? Who is this book written for?
Well, I would start with the person thinking, well, if the book is called To Be Honest, I'm already honest, so I guess I don't need it. You need it the most.
Great.
But for the most part, ask, do you have all the trust that you want? Have you earned all the trust that you need? Do you have no intentions of ever changing relationships, raising your altitude, broadening your stakeholder group at all? If you do, you will find something in the book that will help you be more trustworthy and create a more trustworthy environment. You will find something in the book that holds up a mirror to you and invites you to a better version of yourself. I can promise you that.
That's really great. In your writing of this book, did you have any aha moments about your own honesty?
Oh my gosh, too many to count. And it's funny. I run a writer studio for a bunch of authors who are writing their first books. And in one studio years ago, with one of my graduate students who went on to write an incredible runaway bestseller, but was writing on a very sensitive, controversial topic. And I said to him, if you're going to take on this topic for the sake of your own credibility, you're going to have to disclose your own stories of your own struggles. He said, yeah, I know. And then 5 years later, when I was writing this book, he came back and said, if you're going to write a book on honesty, you're going to have to disclose your own dishonesty to your readers to be credible. I said, yeah, I know. And so I did. And so I did reflect on, sometimes we're so loyal to some values, we don't realize we're violating others, right? So, I was raised in an environment where generosity was a really important value, but at what cost? and from what means. And I had to really examine and confront places in my life where I had learned generosity that and was separate from honesty. And so there's lots of places in my own life where, and I tell those stories in the book, where I've had to sort of hold up my own mirror and say, am I being the best version of myself? And if I'm not, what brings me to that place?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Ron, what is your definition of happiness?
Gosh, I love, I think it was, what was her famous, maybe it was Catherine Hepburn, who said happiness is a box of donuts and joy is, the serenity of a peaceful evening in front of a fire. So I think I'm probably bastardizing that too much. But for me, I distinguish happiness and joy. Happiness is definitely it's a condition. It's a place that brings me to, and so for me, I'm happiest when I either doing something I enjoy and fun, or I'm with people that I love, or doing work that matters to me. I have joy because I'm grateful for the privilege to get up every morning and do what I do. Even when I'm unhappy, I can still be joyful.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your insight with my audience today. Thank you for teaching me so much about honesty today. Just in this little conversation, I've learned so much already as a leader and as a human. I think it's such a fascinating. I'm so excited to dig deeper into your book. And I just want to honor you and say thank you for sharing this with us.
Tarryn, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So great to have you. And to all of you who have been listening, thank you for joining us here today and for having the courage to hear this and to look into your own mirrors and ask your own teams to share with you their insights and just to imagine how you could bring your most honest self to your leadership. And until next time, bye-bye.